Hi guys, we are back with Bringing Elizabeth Home. This is chapter 22. I only have 4 chapters left. This is kind of a little long one. If you hear a rumbling noise, I'm in my car again. I had to run some errands, but tonight I'm really excited. I think I'm going to do a last few of these videos in my car because I'm heading to the theater to watch the finale of Stranger Things, and I'm really excited about it. But anyway, let's get started. This is from Lois' perspective. If you remember from the previous video in the last chapter, Ed was reunited with his daughter after 9 months of her being missing, and now we're going to hear from Lois' perspective of her reuniting with her daughter. I'm so excited to read this part. I can't wait. Alright, chapter 22, Lois. Ed kissed me goodbye and told me he was leaving for the Sandy police station too. He hoped to identify Brydon and Mitchell. It was early afternoon, which is the time I usually pick up our younger children from school. After Ed left, his business phone began ringing, and at first I didn't think much of it. I rarely answer Ed's business phone, since it rings only in his home office. His phone rings often, but on the afternoon of March 12th, it was ringing insistently, so much so that I finally picked it up and heard, "This is Lieutenant Jensen. Is this Lois?" I confirmed it was. "Have you heard?" "Heard what?" I could hear him cover the mouthpiece of his phone to say something to another officer. I thought I heard him say, "She doesn't know?" There was a long pause, and then he said, "We think we found Elizabeth alive." I started to shake, and I kept asking the lieutenant if she was okay. I wanted to see her. Charles was working in the yard, and when he heard me screaming, he didn't want to shout. I didn't want to shout to him what was happening, for fear that neighbors might hear. I asked him to get up to the house as fast as he could. I needed him to drive me to the police station. I was so frantic, I was in no condition to drive. It was a blessing that Charles came home from school early that day. He tried to calm me down, reminding me that we had been through this kind of drill many times. He didn't want me to get my hopes up too high. We had received many phone calls in the previous 9 months about young girls the police had found. Girls between the ages of 14 and 18. Charles kept reassuring me that everything would be fine. He had certainly grown up over the past 9 months. We got into my car, and I don't believe we stopped at the single stop sign. I didn't want to get in an accident, and at first kept telling him to slow down. Then I told him to hurry up. While we were driving, Ed called on my phone and to tell me that he had Elizabeth. It was really her, he said. "You won't believe this, but Elizabeth is here in my arms. I am in Detective Park's car, and we are headed to the Salt Lake Station." I kept asking Ed if it is really her. "Let me talk to her. I want to talk to her." Some cell phone service in Salt Lake is sketchy at best, so of course when Elizabeth got on the line, all I heard was a crackle. "Elizabeth, Elizabeth, I love you. I love you. Is it really you?" I said, not sure if she could hear me or not. It didn't matter. Our daughter was alive and safe in Ed's arms. I kept thinking that the sooner we got to the Salt Lake Police Department, the sooner I would see her. I was 5 minutes away when Ed called, and they were 25 minutes from the station. When we arrived at the station, no one said a word. They made us wait. They tried to send us to a room on the 6th floor, but I refused to go. I wanted to be right there in the front when Elizabeth walked through that door. Everyone kept trying to pacify me, asking if I would like something to drink. Did I need anything to eat? No! I just wanted to see my daughter. They thought it would be better to wait in the privacy of the room on the 6th floor, so I finally agreed and went upstairs. I stood at the window, staring for any sign of my daughter, waiting for what felt like forever. Those 20 minutes seemed like equal to the past 9 months. I sent Charles home to get his brother and sister from school, because they would be waiting for me. They needed to be with us when we were reunited as a family. I knew they'd want to see Elizabeth as much as I did. After Charles left, the mayor of Salt Lake City, Rocky Anderson, arrived at the station. The police station was quickly filling up with officers and investigators. The mayor kept telling me that he wanted to have a welcome home celebration for Elizabeth. I couldn't focus on anything anyone was saying. All I could think about was Elizabeth. When they brought Elizabeth to the 6th floor, I was stunned when I saw her for the first time. It was not Elizabeth, at least not my Elizabeth. She was wearing a gray, long sweatshirt that buttoned up the front, an old, worn pair of jeans that were being held up by a rope. Her hair was in 2 French braids, a way she had never worn her hair before she was taken. Her face was puffy. She was sunburned. She was so much bigger than I remembered. Her shoulders had developed from carrying a heavy backpack. She had grown and developed in the 9 months she was gone. This Elizabeth didn't look like anything like the little girl in the missing posters. It was very hard to see her like that. I grabbed Elizabeth and hugged her as tightly as I could. She held on to me, digging her fingers in my back. I never wanted to let her go, nor did she want to let me go. A few minutes after our reunion, the police took Elizabeth away, explaining that they needed to get her statement while her memory was still fresh and untainted. Not knowing that we didn't have to let the officers interview her, we allowed the police to take her away. Chris Thomas handed Ed his phone. John Walsh had heard that Elizabeth had been found, and he was on the phone. Ed said to John, "You're not going to believe this, but she is here. Elizabeth is here. The police are interviewing her right now." Both Ed and I were worried about the police handling Elizabeth without one of us present. John explained that the police absolutely did not have to question Elizabeth right at that moment. He told Ed to go get her and protect her from the questioning, which would surely be intrusive if not damaging. Ed flew into an absolute rage. "Behavior this is not typical for my husband." He was yelling at everyone. "Put a stop to this right now," he shouted. Ed saw Police Chief Rick Dentz, FBI investigator Chip Burris, and Mayor Rocky Anderson began demanding that they get our daughter. He was pounding his fist on the table and demanding to stop the interview with Elizabeth. I certainly didn't want the media to see Ed in this condition. Ed later told me that his rage was heightened because he couldn't shake his thoughts about how appalling the line of questioning had been for our family when Elizabeth was taken. He couldn't bear the thought of Elizabeth being put through this kind of interrogation. She was a victim. Ed had never shared his phone call with John Walsh with me, so I had no idea why he was losing his composure. This was a time that we should have been rejoicing in privacy as a family. Instead, we were once again being subjected to someone else's agenda. The thought of what Elizabeth had gone through and potential leaks had pushed Ed over the edge. They finally brought Elizabeth back to us, and that's when her brothers and sisters saw her for the first time. They hugged her and held her and told her how much they loved her. We were so happy to have her home. To rejoice, we knelt down in the middle of the police station and had a family prayer. All of our children were there. We knelt in a circle and thanked God for this miracle. This was truly an incredible moment. The police was now packed with people. The word had spread that Elizabeth had been found. A huge crowd had gathered from the outside of the station. The entire block was packed with people. Once again, news vans and satellite trucks had converged in Salt Lake City. This time, it was to celebrate that Elizabeth was home. Sadly, our own celebration would have to wait. The police insisted on getting more testimony from Elizabeth before they would release her for medical examination. They would not allow Ed and me to both be present during her questioning. The police stood firm that if they were to bring charges against Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee, Elizabeth's statements were crucial. They didn't want her recollection to be corrupted by media or other outside influences. That explanation seemed to make some sense to us, so I agreed to accompany her for a questioning. To my utter disbelief, they would not let me sit with Elizabeth during the questioning. I was allowed to witness everything from a room that had a small television monitor, which I could barely hear. I was told that the volume control was broken, but I am not convinced that was the case. Listening to Elizabeth tell all of the nightmares she had suffered through for 9 months was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I felt like dying as I listened to my daughter painstakingly detail the abuse and the assault she endured at the hands of Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee. I will never forget the sinking feeling I had watching my daughter tell of all her living hell. As she spoke, I remember feeling that Wanda Barzee was just as despicable as Brian Mitchell. As a woman, as a mother, how could she have allowed this to happen to a young girl, to someone's daughter? The police finally allowed us to leave the station around 7 o'clock. Though they tried to shield us from the hordes of press and media that had now gathered outside the station, some clever photographers still found a way to shoot us as we made our way to the back of the windowless van that was to take us to the hospital for a medical examination. Elizabeth and I sat in the back of the van, looking out the front windshield, passing billboards and posters that bore Elizabeth's image. I explained that the whole country had been praying for her. I told her that the light blue ribbons that were hanging all over town were in her honor. Elizabeth said she had noticed them all over the 9 months, but never realized they were for her. I thought light blue was appropriate since it's your favorite color. Mom, light blue is not my favorite color. Why would you pick light blue? We passed by her junior high school, and there was a banner strewn across the fence that said, "We love you, Liz." And suddenly it sunk in. Elizabeth was home. Really home. We were taken to the University Hospital in Salt Lake, where we were whisked through a private door and down a corridor that was virtually empty. Elizabeth was given a complete physical Thank heaven she was healthy. Her diet had been limited while she had been held captive. Elizabeth ate 1 meal a day, and that was usually bread. She wasn't able to get much exercise, since she usually sat around tethered by a cable. When she did come down from the canyon, she walked as and was forced to carry a heavy backpack. I could see Elizabeth was uncomfortable, so I tried to get her through the medical exam as quickly as possible. The hospital staff was able to come up with a pair of sweatpants and clean t-shirt so Elizabeth could get out of the smelly, grungy, dirty clothes she had been in for those too many months. It must have felt good to put on clean clothes. Finally, at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, Elizabeth and I were able to head home. She wanted to go home. We started toward our neighborhood in the same van that took us to the hospital, and someone stopped us to say that we couldn't get up the street because there were too many reporters blocking the road. That was simply ridiculous. It was out of the question that Elizabeth couldn't be taken straight home. I demanded the police make a way for us. They had the authority to move all those people. I called Ed, who had taken the other children from home when Elizabeth and I went to the hospital, and told him to open the garage so the van could pull right in. Elizabeth was entitled to have some privacy at her homecoming. We had so little privacy left. It was the least they could do to grant us the moment of bringing our daughter home in peace. We walked through the door to see the fences of her brothers and sister. Our extended family and friends had made banners and hung balloons all up and down our street. There were blue ribbons tied on the handrails of steps leading to our home. Fresh ribbons could have been seen up and down our street, tied to trees, bushes, and lampposts. The first thing Elizabeth wanted to do was take a bath. I drew the biggest bubble bath I had ever made in a large jacuzzi tub. The dirt, grime, and soot that sat on the bottom of the tub when she finished the bath was thick and muddy. She washed her hair over and over again, giving new meaning to the phrase rinse and repeat. I don't think she totally felt clean for a solid week. She basically hadn't bathed in 9 months. Elizabeth had been living out in the wild. If she was lucky, once a week Brian and Wanda would give her a cold bucket of water to pour over her head. Elizabeth bathed. She wanted to play a piece on the harp. She struggled through a song and realized she was a bit out of practice. She looked up at all of us and said, "Well, it's been 9 months." It was wonderful to see that she hadn't lost her sense of humor. Around midnight, we all piled on my bed, and Elizabeth asked if we could watch the tape of one of her favorite movies, The Trouble with Angels. The children gathered around, some on the bed and others on the floor, and for the first time in 9 months, we were back to being a regular family. I was certain that Elizabeth would be sleeping in our room that first night. I couldn't imagine her wanting to go back to the bed from which she had been taken. However, when the movie ended, Elizabeth got up and nothing had ever happened and said she was tired and ready for bed. We all knelt down to give thanks to our Heavenly Father for this miracle. "Mom, don't worry, I'm just fine and I'm going to be safe. I'm going to be here in the morning." I will never forget those words. She kissed us goodnight and went to her room. We didn't quite know what to expect. "Good night and we love you." As you might expect, we spent most of the night checking in on her, just to be sure. For me, the 9 months Elizabeth was gone in a way mirrored my pregnancy with her. Even though I didn't get to see her, I knew that she was there. When your child goes missing in a way, the umbilical cord is reattached and is far more difficult to cut. After Elizabeth came home, the cord was stronger than ever. The next morning, when Mary Catherine awoke, she said she had the best night of a sleepover. For the first time in 9 months, she didn't need her nightlight. She said her prayers had been answered because Elizabeth had come home. "The Lord has strengthened my heart while Elizabeth was gone so that I could bear my burdens." The beginning of her healing had already started with the many prayers that were being said on her behalf. The odds were heavily stacked against bringing Elizabeth home. Even if we were fortunate enough to find her, what kind of damage would she have suffered? Most kids who have recovered suffered indelible long-term effects from their trauma. I don't know that any of us understand that full magnitude of what we all experienced during those 9 months and the several months since Elizabeth has come home. I have my daughter back, and the most glorious resolution I could have ever hoped for. With God's help, we will survive. That's a beautiful chapter. Kind of frustrated with the police and how they handled the case, but very beautiful chapter. That's the end of chapter 22. Chapter 23. Before I read this, I need to say that this is a pretty long chapter. So if I split this video into 2 parts, I'm really sorry. But if I don't, then that means I'm pretty good at reading long chapters out loud without my mouth feeling very dry. Okay. Now, before I read the chapter, there's a quote on here from Elizabeth's father, and it's from Ed Smart. And it was dated back in 2002. It said, "One soul is lost, an angel is missing, which mother's grieving is more. Hearts unite in love and prayer, thousands, millions petition the Lord. How often one's faith is extended and strengthened on the road of our early estate. We pray for the lost soul to return to the fold. Life's journey has not yet ended." Kind of like a poem that he wrote. I like that. All right, chapter 23. Bringing Elizabeth home would seem like a logical place to end our journey. In truth, we would have loved nothing more than to have our daughter back and move on with our lives. But that isn't the reality of the situation we face after Elizabeth came home. We know what it's like to lose a child, to have a stranger snatch her right out from under our watchful eyes. There can be no real end to our story until there is an end to the plight of the missing children. We are one of the few fortunate families who got their missing child back. How can we expect to have no involvement in crusading for the well-being of all missing children? The Red Shirt Alert had just been put in place in Utah in April 2002, 3 months before Elizabeth was taken. It was named for Rachel Runyan, a 4-year-old girl who was kidnapped and found dead. The Red Shirt Alert had gone out 4 hours after we reported Elizabeth missing. It was the first time Utah put the system to use. There was a certain criteria that must be before the police would activate the alert. First, they needed to determine that the child is a minor or mentally handicapped. Second, they needed to establish that the missing child is in imminent danger. Third, they must be certain it is not a runaway situation, that the child has in fact been abducted. And fourth, a description of the missing child has to be complete. Without establishing these guidelines, the alert would be useless. There would be too many alerts for the system to be effective. What it boils down is to having an educated law enforcement that can quickly determine whether the situation meets the criteria. As Elizabeth's photo had been released to the media hours before the statewide alert went out. Why it took so long when an eyewitness said Elizabeth had been taken at gunpoint seemed a mystery. The fact is that human judgment is a critical element in deciding whether the criteria are met for the sending out an alert. Granted, we hope this doesn't become such a common occurrence, but training and ability to recognize the criteria makes the difference between minutes and hours. The difference between life and death. The police were uncertain she was in danger and had been abducted, so there was hesitation in sending out the alert. Since Elizabeth's abduction, Utah has made tremendous improvements by upgrading their system, which later became the Amber Alert. With the finest state-of-the-art technology, California, which was in process of getting its alert system off the ground when Utah sent out the alert about Elizabeth, wanted to glean everything it could from what Utah had done in order to make its system successful. Following Elizabeth's abduction, the state implemented a public alert system using electronic highway signs and private electronic signs volunteered by their owners. The alert system is not a cure-all. It doesn't catch everyone, but it remains in the state of evolution, with many people's continual efforts making it more effective, and most important, it does something. That is a comfort to the families whose children go missing. When it works, it brings children home. We never want to see any parent go through what we had been through as parents of a missing child. For Ed, getting involved with the Amber Alert has become an ongoing effort. It is an issue that has been debated for years and has finally received the attention it deserves. We often wonder how quickly a unified alert system would pass through Congress if a child of a representative or a senator had been kidnapped. This is something that had been taken care of a long time ago. We must have a potential safety net out there. We lobbied Washington to make several attempts to meet with the right people to try and push the Amber Alert. We felt strongly that there was something good we could do as a result of Elizabeth's disappearance. We met with staff members who were always cordial and both politically and diplomatically correct. But we're not the people who could make changes in Washington. When Elizabeth came home, Ed directed his frustration directly at Congressman Jim Sensbury-Ner. It seemed the head of the Judiciary Committee had the ultimate power. It was clear that something had to be done in Washington to get the standalone Amber Alert bill pushed through. The process was taking so long. Sensbury-Ner's position could allow the bill to go through. He was holding the trump card to make it happen. He refused to play. He wouldn't meet with us. His aides said that he didn't want to make this a political issue. He was receiving negative coverage in his local media. He warned us that this issue would promptly be placed at the bottom of his to-do list if that ever happened again. How does anything ever pass through the system? Something as important as saving your children put at the bottom of the pile. We couldn't force anyone, but we knew we could get their attention. At the time, the Senate again voted unanimously for the bill. Congress had voted for the Child Protection Act, which encompasses so much more than the Amber Alert, but the two entities were at loggerheads. We had pushed with Martin Frost and Congresswoman Dunn for a petition for isolating the Amber Alert from the Child Protective Act, which would have moved the bill through the system faster. It was time for the leaders of the country to act like leaders. This should have been a nonpartisan issue. There was no question that everyone wanted it, but it got clogged in the wheels of legislation. We implored Congressman Chris Cannon, Senator Hatch, Senator Bennett, and Jim Matheson to help. We still had a fair amount of press coverage covering Elizabeth's disappearance. We were able to get the media to cover our efforts. The media definitely helped us to pass that bill into law. It filled our hearts to continually hear success stories, knowing that children could be saved. These children who were missing were not just being held hostage by their abductors, they were hostages of the system. When Elizabeth came home, Ed was so elated to have her back that in a statement to that press, he asked that we all think of the parents out there who are not as lucky as we were to have our child home. There are missing children right now, and there are children who will go missing in the future. That will be abducted tomorrow. We, the people of America, have a chance to make a difference. It is called the Amber Alert. The blood of those children will be on your head. Jan Sumner, you are halting this. Leaders need to step up to the plate. They need to be the leaders. Do what you need to do to make this happen. Call your congressman. This saves lives. Don't let another death happen because of your unwillingness to change. This statement raised a lot of eyebrows in Washington. Ed continuously made this point the night Elizabeth came home and the next morning during the rounds of talk show appearances. If that is what it took to get this bill passed, then so be it. We, along with Elizabeth, wrote a letter to Congress asking them to please bring the Amber Alert as a standalone bill. We wanted to get the job done. We heard our letter was read on the floor. And the letter says this: March 18th, 2003, an open letter to the House of Representatives. Thank you very much for your continued support and warm wishes over the past 9 months. We especially appreciate all the representatives who are working together to diligently pass the National Amber Alert legislation. Today, Elizabeth was introduced to the Amber Alert when she asked about the videotape in my office. After watching the coverage, Elizabeth asked why the legislation had not passed when it saved so many children's lives. I could not give her an answer. After a lengthy conversation about how the Amber Alert has been politicized, she asked me if there was anything she could do to help it pass. We decided to draft this letter. As you know, I can't express how our children can't wait any other day for the National Amber Alert to be signed into law by President Bush. Please, please, please pass the standalone Amber Alert system. Now, as soon as you do, I will be there to celebrate, and then we'll go on to work with you on lobbying the Senate to pass other pending issues for our children. I wish to apologize to anyone who was ever offended by my excitement last week. You cannot comprehend the joy of having your child return. The Amber Alert will make this a reality for countless families. Please don't underestimate the immediacy and power of this legislation. This is your opportunity to show your leadership for our children. We look forward to seeing you soon. Sincerely, Ed, Lois, and Elizabeth Smart. All right. It looked as if our efforts were beginning to pay off. It was becoming clear that Washington was willing to compromise and go into conference on the larger bill. But then I received a distressing call from John Walsh, who seemed certain the issue was dead. The following day, the bill went to the Senate floor and was openly debated between Senator Ted Kennedy and Senator Orrin Hatch. At the end of the Senator Hatch's representation, he called for a vote, and the bill was unanimously passed. We were so grateful for the bill passing, which protects the rights and freedom of all children in the United States. To hear about the bipartisan effort in which egos were put aside and the right thing was finally done was overwhelming. Our hat goes off to the many people who made this happen, including Congressman Jim Rainer, who fought for the bigger picture, Congressman Martin Frost, Congresswoman Jennifer Dunn, Senator Orrin Hatch, Senator Joe Biden, Senator Patrick Leahy, and so many others who worked behind the scenes and came together to protect those young people who are our future. We would like all parents of missing children to have their children safely home. We won't rest until this country has a unified interstate alert system. It seems such an easy thing to set up. What could be more important than the safety of our children? After Elizabeth was rescued, we were invited to Washington, D.C. to witness President George Bush sign the Child Protective Act, including the Amber Alert bill, into law. The White House was incredible. We never dreamed we'd be there. We met President Bush in a private room and spoke with him for a half hour. Other parents of missing children were there as well. Some parents had children who had been rescued, and others still had missing children, and there were 2 young girls there who had been students at Cal Poly when they had been kidnapped while sitting in a car with some friends. One of the girls approached Elizabeth and told her how happy she was to meet her, and that she was more excited to meet Elizabeth than she was President Bush. The truth is, we were all eager to meet one another at the White House, having been through the summer of missing children. It was very touching. We were so proud to witness the signing of the Child Protection Act, especially having Elizabeth at our side. Later that day, Elizabeth was asked to play the harp for a special segment of the John Walsh Show. She was radiant all in white as she performed with the Capitol building as her backdrop. After we returned home from Washington, it didn't take long for the Diaz investigator to make a point of telling us that the hardest part of our journey lies ahead, the trial. Incredibly, they told us that the kidnapping was a breeze compared to the struggles we'll face if and when Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Marcy go to trial. Obviously, we don't accept that anything could be as bad as having lost Elizabeth. The subject of victims' rights have become a particular interest to us in the past few months. As we face the upcoming trial, our eyes have been opened to the shortcomings of the judicial process as it pertains to a victim of a crime. Victims of a crime have long been on the receiving end of neglect from legislators and mistreatment from members of the criminal justice system. They are most often relegated to enduring the consequences of the crime committed against them without any support or assistance. Victims are often treated without any dignity or respect by law enforcement as well as members of the media. Something we became all too familiar with during the investigation as the parents of a victim. Unfortunately, victims deal with the frustration of immediately becoming inactive participants, forced to take a peripheral role in the legal process. In Elizabeth's case, it would be a blessing that she would not be exposed to a cruel reenactment of the ordeal in the courtroom. The case becomes a legal matter between the defendant and the state, leaving victims excluded from decisions and charges being brought against the defendants. They often have little or no influence over the prosecution for their case. No rights to choose legal representation, and no right to appeal because there are no federal laws in the books to ensure anything. We personally have hired legal representation but for most victims, it is not a given. Not only has the victim gone through the pain of a horrifying criminal act, but they are then also forced to suffer future victimization during the justice process. The bottom line is that crime does not victimize only one person. Grief-stricken family members may have been considered indirect victims as well. Mothers, fathers, wives, husbands, brothers, sisters, and children. For too long, our criminal justice system has failed to recognize the dignity, welfare, and understanding of the living victims left to deal with the overwhelming tragedy. They are left with no right to due process, no right to a lawyer, no right to privacy, no right to be informed and consulted, no right to access to court record, and no right to the finality of their traumatic ordeal. The criminal acts through its destructive path, leaving victims as mere evidence. Why shouldn't it be federal law that victims receive timely notice of any release, escape, public proceeding involving the crime? Why should victims often not be allowed to speak at release, plea sentencing, and commutation and pardon proceedings? All of the foregoing constitutional rights are granted to the accused offenders. Number 1, the U.S. Constitution guarantees more than a dozen rights to those accused of committing crimes. Number 2, victims' rights are secondary to the constitutional rights of defendants, as well as secondary to the interests of judges and lawyers, some who are insensitive and have their own agendas. Number 3, a new sensitivity to victims' rights can be brought about only by ensuring that the U.S. Constitution guarantees their right to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. At that moment, criminal justice seems like justice for criminals. Approximately 9% of reported violent crimes are resolved with the perpetrator being incarcerated. In turn, this influences the justice process because it affects its victims' decisions of whether or not to come forward when a crime has been committed. Currently, 14 states have enacted constitutional amendments for the rights of victims. In addition, Patrick Leahy, DVT, introduced the Crime Victims Assistance Act of 2003 on April 7, 2003, which aims to enhance the rights of crime victims and to establish grants for local governments to assist crime victims. General victims' rights only some states abide by. Number 1, to be treated with fairness, respect, dignity, and to have a swift and fair resolution of your case. Number 2, to be informed of all critical stages of criminal justice process. Number 3, to be present and heard in court for any bond reduction amendment of charges, disposition, sentencing, or continuances. Number 4, to have a safe waiting area near the court. Number 5, to confer with the district attorney's office before the case is resolved or goes to trial and to be informed of the outcome. Number 6, to prepare a victim impact statement and to be present at sentencing. Number 7, to be restitution ordered. Number 8, to pursue a civil judgment against anyone who has committed a crime against you. Number 9, to be informed of post-conviction release or modification hearings. Number 10, to get your property back quickly when it is no longer needed for prosecution. Number 11, to apply for victims' compensation for crime-related losses, such as therapy, medical, and funeral expenses. As parents, we strongly urge you to get involved with your legislators on the issue of victims' rights. Write your congressman, your senator, the president of the United States, and tell him or her that you think that time has come to make changes in the system to protect the victim, not the defendant. If it were your child, what would you do? Crime Victims' Rights Amendment proposed in April 2003. The U.S. Constitution, mainly through amendments, grants those accused of a crime many rights such as speedy trial, jury trial, counsel, the right against self-incrimination, the right to be free from the unreasonable searches and seizures, the right to subpoena witnesses, the right to confront witnesses, and the right to due process under the law. The same document, however, guarantees no right to crime victims. Victims have no right to be present, no right to be informed of hearings, no right to be heard at sentencing or at a parole hearing, no right to insist on reasonable conditions of release to protect the victim, no right to restitution, no right to challenge unending delays in the disposition of their case, and no right to be held if they might be in danger from release or escape of their attacker. The Crime Victims' Rights Amendment would bring a new balance to the judicial system. The rights of the amendment. The amendment gives victims of violent crimes the right of, number 1, to reasonable and timely notice of any public proceeding involving the crime and of any release or escape of accused. Number 2, reasonably to be heard at a public release, plea, sentencing, reprieve, and pardon proceedings. Number 3, to adjudicative decisions that duly consider the victim's safety, interest, in avoiding reasonable delay, and just and timely claims to restitution from the offender. In the 106th Congress, Senators Dianne Feinstein and John Gill introduced S.J. 3 in the Crime Victims' Rights Constitutional Amendment, which was sponsored by a bipartisan group of 41 senators, including Senator Biden, Reid, Lieberman, Lott, McCain, Craig, and Snow. Governors in 49 out of the 50 states have called for an amendment. In 2000, 43 attorneys generals, including the 3 federal, endorsed the amendment. There is a strong support around the country for an amendment. 32 states have passed similar measures by an average popular vote of almost 80%. In April 2003, Senator Gill talked at length about fundamental reform of the criminal justice system, which can be brought about only by changes in the fundamental law. The Constitution, he said, that changes to establish rights by federal or state statute, or even state constitutional amendment, have proved inadequate after more than 20 years of trying. Rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution will provide for a national baseline. According to a report by the National Institute of Justice, even in the states that have victims' rights legislation, fewer than 60% of the victims were notified of the sentencing hearing, and fewer than 40% were notified of the release of the defendant. The Crime Victims' Rights Amendment has strong support in House and Senate and from the International Association of Chiefs of Police and major national victims' rights groups, including Parents of Murdered Children and National Organization for Victim Assistance, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, Arizona Voice for Crime Victims, Crime Victims United in memory of victims everywhere. And that is the end of chapter 23. I do apologize for me sounding a little like tongue twistery. It's just, man, there's some words that they had on here that it was hard for me to pronounce at first. Okay, we're on chapter 24. So, let's see. Alright, I'm going to stop there because that was a long chapter. So, I guess I didn't have to split the video into two parts. It was one video. So, woohoo! We are almost done. We have three chapters left. 24, 25, and 26. And these are fairly short. So, I'm going to stop there though because I read a long chapter and need a break. Alright, that's all. Bye.